Hey, what's up everybody? Commander Radix here, bringing you another video, and today I thought we were going to do a little review on a book I've read. That's right, Commander Radix has read a book. So, some of you might remember my video a few weeks ago where I mentioned that I was going to use the internet a lot less. I was going to start going analog, I was going to start reading books more often, and I have found that I really like reading books. I am reading books a lot now. I started by reading two different books. One of them is Dr. Goebbels, His Life in Death by Roger Manvell and Heinrich Frankl. Okay, and I'm still reading that. I'm almost done with that. But at the same time, I was reading The Histories by Herodotus, a new translation by Robin Waterfield, published by Oxford World's Classics. And it is a thick book. So a little background on Herodotus. Herodotus is often called the father of history. He's probably the first person to go out and do history as a study, by asking questions, by going to different sources, by comparing different sources. Of course, you have histories earlier than that. You have mythology, and mythology is oftentimes a sort of history. You also have things like poems and bards, what they wrote. You have things like the Iliad, which is also sort of mythology. But there are these historical tales, this memory of the past told through mythology, told through poems. But Herodotus is the first one that goes out, gets different sources, and compares the sources. And that's sort of the process we associate with the job of the historian. So Herodotus, the father of history, his book is literally where we get the word history from. It's called The Histories, or literally it's Greek for the inquiries. The inquiries? I don't know how you say it, which is bad as a historian. But in Greek, that's historia. And of course, that turns into English history, which in English it comes to mean the story of the past, right? So, when I heard that there was this guy who wrote the first history book, I'm like, wow, this dude was going out in the ancient world writing down everything by hand. That's interesting. But what I didn't expect was how thick the book is. The book is massive. It comes out to about, not including the glossary and the notes, it comes out to about 590 pages, I think it was. Yeah, 590 pages. It's very small font, it's very thin pages, and it comes out to be a very massive book. I did not expect that. What else do I want to say about the book? Herodotus is Greek. He's from, I believe it's Halicarnassus or something like that, from technically Ionia, the territory that would be controlled by the Persian Empire. And the book is written after the Persian Wars, the Greco-Persian Wars, and Herodotus is meant to tell the story of the Greco-Persian Wars, but he wants to give you as much context as possible, so he goes out to like, well, you know, this book is supposed to be about the Greco-Persian Wars, but if you go to the very beginning, after a few references and hints towards old Greek mythology, it goes into the story of a guy named Croesus, the king of Lydia, and like the history of the ancient kingdom of Lydia, which we know today to be an Indo-European speaking country in Anatolia during, like, you know, the Iron Age and all that. Which is a weird place to start your story unless you know about Croesus and Croesus's role with the Persian Empire, and then you go into the war between, you know, Darius and Xerxes against the Greeks. So it's a very large book. Book 3 is all about Egypt, you know, because the Persian Empire expands into Egypt, and then Herodotus is like, wait, let me tell you about Egypt, and then he goes off on it. It's 9 books in total. The books are... The line, where you draw a line for a book, is sort of a made-up concept. It wasn't what Herodotus had thought up of. The theory given by the commentary is that the books were designed to fit the binding in the Hellenistic age, which is hundreds of years after, well, like just 100 or 200 years after Herodotus. But there are 9 books, each focusing on different things. I think book 7 or thereabouts is really where the Persian Wars start. I really liked... Well, I have some notes here, and I want to break down my thoughts of this book by those notes, okay? First, I have written down, impactful, illustrates the humanness of the past. When I'm reading Herodotus, I feel like the past is a place where humans existed. Now that might sound a little weird. What do you mean by that, Radix? What I mean is, too often we can read the past and we can just get drawn into the borders changing, the countries changing, the wars, right? But we don't really know that much about the people, right? So in Herodotus, it's not really just a history, it's an what would you call it, an ethnology? You're learning about these different cultures, these different people, their practices, and you can read this and realize just how interesting people's lives were back in the day. Very impactful, Herodotus's book. My next point is more right than wrong, ? How have we treated him and his work? Ants. So let me break down what that note that is only comprehensible to me actually means. One thing I hate about the sort of history academia is how much they seem to hate the past that they study, and how much they see themselves, the modern world, as better than the world of the past. And you can see that in how they treat ancient historians. Often ancient historians are sort of treated as unworthy, as not reliable. And when you read Herodotus and you compare it to more recent findings in history, you come to realize that Herodotus is very often correct. And even about things that sound insane. He talks about these giant ants in India that, hunt for gold or whatever. And you read that and you're like, wow, what's with this giant ant stuff? But it comes to find out that in the area today that there's this sort of rodent species that digs burrows in the ground that Herodotus talks about. And they also do something with gold. I forget what that was. It was like hoarding it or something. I can't remember. But you hear about that and you realize, oh, yeah, Herodotus is looking at this through the lens of a Greek guy who asked probably a Persian guy who asked an Indian guy, right? He's several sources separate from the main subject, but just saying, wow, Herodotus is just sitting here making up lies, just deciding to randomly tell his Athenian audience that there are big gold mining ants in India, when actually it's probably based off that one rodent type creature. And you think about that and it's like, oh, so not everything is a lie, and not everything is meant to be a lie. There are things on which these things are based on. So I think, one thing I really don't like about historical academia is how they treat ancient historians, and I think ancient historians need a little bit more respect and need to be understood as a little bit more of an authoritative source. Yes, they might get some things wrong. They don't have access to a huge encyclopedia to cross-check their notes, but that doesn't change the fact that they are doing a sort of historical method. And that very often these things are based on things. I think Herodotus mentions the richest Greek person ever in the book, and then there was no record of him until more recently, where they discovered an inscription about that really rich Greek dude. So Herodotus is more right than we give him credit for. Another thing I wanted to talk about this book is Cyrus the Great, because I knew nothing about King Cyrus the Great before I started reading this book. And by the way, at the same time, I'm also reading the Bible, which I've referenced earlier in my video where I'm moving away from the internet. And I'm reading Herodotus, and this is a world of darkness, a world where people suffer, and then this Cyrus the Great guy pops up as the leader of Persia, and he's very, he's a natural leader, people like him who know him, and then he starts expanding, taking over these evil kingdoms like Assyria and Babylonia and all that, and I'm watching, the story of Cyrus the Great play out across the Near East during his time. He's building up the Persian Empire, and I'm thinking, wow, this guy is kind of different from everyone else. He has more of a soul, you could say, than everyone else. He puts Croesus on a funeral pyre about to kill him, but then he decides to spare Croesus's life because Croesus seems to be sad or whatever. And it's intriguing to see him show what, by ancient standards, would be considered compassion, right? And then I decide to, search up who is this Cyrus the Great guy. And then I come to find out that according to Jewish and Christian sources, Cyrus the Great is like some guy anointed by God to sort of be the savior of the Jews and of the people, and he's like being gifted this, sort of light, not the fullness, but a sort of light from God to bring justice to the world. And I'm reading that like, wow, yeah, that's sort of the same vibe I was getting from Herodotus. But that was a very interesting thing I want to bring up. One drawback to this book is that there is so many names. It's so many names of so many different people, so many of them starting with the letter A. It just got confusing at some points. I found myself just zoning out while I'm reading it, and the next thing I know, there's like 5 different guys with the name A, all in some weird, complex story about some sort of betrayal or whatever, and I do not know what's going on. And also, I didn't read the footnotes. Well, they're not really footnotes, they're notes in the back. I don't like notes in the back. Please put your footnotes at the bottom of the page, dear God. But I see that there's a lot of information in the notes, and I really want to read this book again more closely. Probably not anytime soon, because it took me like a few months to read this book, or maybe about 1 month to read this book. And wow, there's so much there, but I want to really go through it slowly, figure out each person, every time I see a place name, reference it on a map, look at the reference notes, because I think that will really help me give a more complete look at the history of the Near East at this time. But yeah, it's not an easy... As a book, it's not easy to just zone out and go with it and just read it. It's not that easy. It requires your full attention to get all out of this book. And I think that there is a lot to take out of this book. Some things people like to get on ancient historians a lot for is when they create speeches and put them in the mouths of other characters in their story, because it's not historically accurate. But what I found while reading these speeches is that those speeches are really good, and they're tools to help us understand the motivations and thoughts of the actual people in history. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that there's the understanding that we don't have complete quotations. Like, obviously, for all events in history, you don't have one person sitting down and writing every single thing every person said to have that record. Be skeptical of most quotes you hear, right? As long as it wasn't, recorded and you can hear it with your own ears. But the way these ancient historians, especially Herodotus, create these speeches really makes the world pop alive. And I really like the whole scene where Xerxes is convincing the Persians to go to war with the Greeks. It is a great scene. It's a great back and forth between him and his generals. That's something I think I'll be flipping back to every now and then. And I really think we shouldn't be so hostile towards the speeches. I thought they were pretty good. It definitely added to the reading experience. I want to talk a little bit about Herodotus' methodology and his methods of collecting history. So he goes around, this is written during a time where a genre of book called the travelogue is really popular in ancient Greek culture, where the Greeks would go around the world and just take notes about what they saw, what they did, basically a journal, a log of their travels, travelogue, you get the idea. And Herodotus basically was doing something similar to that, but he was going around asking each group of people he came across what their story was. Where did they come from? What is their history? In history, the story of history is understood to be, where you came from, right? You know where your family came from. So you know your personal history, you might know your family's history. And as time goes on, as social units come together and civilizations are developed, you might know your village's history, your region's history, right? But especially as we enter, or as we come out of the chaos of the Bronze Age collapse, and as the world is starting to rebuild itself, we're seeing civilizations encounter each other again. And now it's important to understand that every nation has a role in the world. Every nation interacts with other nations, and cause and effect can lead to some crazy things. A rebellion in Media can lead to a full-on invasion of Greece, like 100 or 200 years later, right? And what Herodotus wants to illustrate by asking all these people these questions is that we are part of a connected world, that all these countries interact with each other. What happens in one country will affect others. That's what he's trying to show. This is the backbone from which we are going to build history, the field of history from. Asking questions, comparing sources. And Herodotus will tell you, I was told this sounds like bullcrap, but I was told it, so I'm going to write it down. He does that a few times in the book. And then sometimes he says, nobody knows the answer to this question, but since I have all these sources, I think I can pinpoint what really happened here, right? So he is definitely operating like one of the earliest historians. I know that there are a lot of people who don't like Herodotus. I think they're wrong. On the contrary, I think Herodotus does a lot better than modern-day historians, because modern-day historians will be so boring, and they will bring in all this irrelevant data that doesn't really tell a story, and I think storytelling is one of the most important parts of history, because you don't remember just random data clumps, you remember stories, and history is no use to us if we just don't remember it, right? Now, I did get a copy of the Iliad while I was reading this book, and let me say I regret not reading the Iliad first. Now, I was already halfway done through Herodotus before I even received my copy of the Iliad, and I still don't have like the Odyssey or things like that in the Homeric cycle. But I really think that if I had read those books first, I would have had a better idea of what was going on in Herodotus, because Herodotus references Homer's works a few times. So if you want prior reading before going into Herodotus, I would recommend Homer. And also through Homer, it's a poem. It's meant to show you this world of Greece, not as a historical book, but as a tale, as an epic, right? So you're probably going to remember like the Argives and all these different places in Greece and all these groups in Greece better if you experience the Iliad before you go straight into Herodotus, who just assumes you know where everyone and everything is in Greece. So yeah, I finished reading Herodotus's The Histories, and to replace Herodotus in my 2-book reading system, I started reading Agricola and Germania if we're using proper Latin, by Tacitus, specifically the Graphico editions. Now, it's only like 60 pages, so I've actually already finished it. I have finished Tacitus in between me finishing Herodotus and me actually recording this. But expect a review on Agricola and Germania by Tacitus at some point. I'm still reading Dr. Goebbels. But after I finished Tacitus, I've started reading, and what I'm currently reading right now is A History of Japan Revised Edition by R.H.P. Mason and J.G. Kiger from Tuttle Publishing. And I will also review this book once I am finished with that. So look at me, I'm being a very prolific reader, if I do say so myself. It's been fun, living life without the internet. I'm really enjoying reading. I've been taking notes. I've been writing my own sort of history journal, where it's sort of the outcome of my history research that I want to turn into videos sooner rather than later. But yeah. Are there any books you're interested in me reading and talking about? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you have not yet. Remember to follow me on social media, granted that I don't use it that often anymore. All the links you want are in the description. And yeah, remember to have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.